Welcome to the fourth conversation in the hashtag STH in Conversation webinar series. The series runs from July to November 2020. This month's conversation topic is Reframing Domestic Tourism to Foster Diversity and Inclusion. My name is Egbeoyegun Adeoye, and I will be your host for this conversation. The University of Johannesburg School of Tourism and Hospitality is ranked #1 school in Africa for tourism and hospitality. As a leading academic institution in tourism and hospitality on the continent, the hashtag STH in Conversation webinar series is about providing thought leadership on contemporary issues facing the sector. The aim of these conversations is not to provide all the answers, but rather to spark ideas and provide a platform for discussion that connects people through conversation. It's my pleasure to introduce the panel for this month's conversation to you. We have a panel of 4. My first guest is Ms. Refilwe Lechao. Refilwe holds a master's in tourism and hospitality from the School of Tourism and Hospitality, of course, UJ. She's currently a part-time lecturer with the School of Tourism and Hospitality. In 2019, Refilwe was awarded the prestigious Young Talent Award at the World Tourism Forum in Lucerne. Welcome, Refilwe.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Ms. Karen Borain. Karen is an STH board member. She's also the Training and Development Manager for Sohosan Academy. She's responsible for training over 12,000 of Sohosan's employees. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you, great to be here.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Mr. Blackie Komani. Blackie is the Deputy Group CEO of Tovest Holdings. With over 30 years of experience across the tourism industry, both locally and internationally, Blackie is currently the board chairperson of the Tourism Business Council of South Africa. Welcome to the conversation this afternoon, Blackie.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
Thank you. And finally, but certainly not least, I'd like to welcome Mr. Brandon Adams. Brandon is a general manager at City Lodge Hotel Group. He's also a 2-time alumnus of the School for Hospitality and Tourism and Hospitality, having completed both a national diploma and a BTEC with STH. Welcome to the panel this afternoon, Brandon.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Great. So the way that our conversation will work is that our panelists will be engaged in conversation, both through some of the questions that I will be posing to them, but also your questions. We look forward to receiving your questions. So you might notice in the webinar that the chat function will be disabled. The Q&A function, however, is open for us to receive your questions. So please make sure that you're typing in those questions and we will be pulling them into the conversation from time to time. We really would welcome your contributions because this is meant to be an interactive session and we certainly want your voice in the conversation as well. Okay, so we start. And I'd like to start by asking Refilwe this question. What is domestic tourism?
Simply put, I think the easiest definition of domestic tourism is a resident of a country taking part in any touristic activity within that same country. So this could be attending a meeting in Cape Town or Durban, or even visiting friends in another province. So it's a wider range of activities, but basically taking part within the tourism industry and you're a resident of that particular country.
So does that mean if I'm going home in December and I live in another province, I'm actually engaging in the tourism industry?
Definitely. I feel, especially with students, they have that misapprehension that they are not tourists, but they actually are tourists. It's a specific kind of tourism where it's called, it's VFR, visiting friends and relatives. And it's a huge market in South Africa. And it's maybe it's not really focused on that much, but it is a very dominant form of domestic tourism.
Thank you for that. And Blackie, I'd like to ask you, so we're talking about diversity and inclusion in this conversation. And maybe the first place to start is, for whom was the tourism industry, the domestic tourism industry, created in South Africa?
Thank you, Eb, and good afternoon, everyone. If you look at the history of the tourism industry of our country. And you cannot divorce it from our past. You know, if you look at who was traveling within the country, it was designed for the 12% of the population of the country. And I tell you what, you know, some of you will be familiar with a hotel group called Forever Resorts. That group was owned by the government until the new government came into place. And it was exclusively used by the 12% of our population. So, you know, our industry was designed for that for the domestic, and then you jump from the other 88% and you go to international. So there was no middle. You know, our tourism industry, and I've been in this industry for 30 years and I've worked in South Africa and outside South Africa. It was designed for white people. And then you need to transition. And you see that even in the service levels that are offered and the products that are offered, you know, some of the products are not talking to us as Black people. And therefore, a part of the transition and inclusion needs to address those things. And I look at academic schools to say maybe the curriculum needs to take that into consideration. Because what you're doing, you're force-feeding people who feel uncomfortable. You know, when you look at advertising for beaches, you have a size 1. You know, not everyone's a size 1. So right. We've got to be realistic. We have to be realistic as who our audience is. And so to answer that question, yes, it was designed for that, like many of the infrastructures that we have in the country.
Yeah. And in fact, what you're pointing out is a kind of double issue that we need to deal with. So on the one hand is, as you say, the 12%, which we know in our context in South Africa translates to our white population. And then there's the international. So there's the international population that's catered for, there's the white population. And yet here we are, COVID-19 having sort of closed our international borders. Here we are, how many ever years post-94, and domestic tourism is not only probably the biggest driver for growth, at least in the short term, for South Africa, but the 88% that you were talking about, which it was not catered for, are your biggest opportunities for growth as well. Where do we go from here? How do we make the industry more inclusive? So Brandon, let's look at it from an operating perspective. You work with a hotel group, and in fact, you see it from both sides. Blackie was talking about the curriculum needs to change. You're a product of that curriculum, and now you're working in industry. Operationally speaking, where do we go from here? How do we bring that 88% in practically?
I think we've really come a long way already as far as to a certain degree, including the 88%. However, there is still a lot of progress and changes that need to happen. Talking not only from a racial background, but also from, if we look at sexual orientation and so on, you're saying working in the industry and being a traveler myself, being a member of the LGBTQ community, there is, companies overall are very accepting, I must say, over predominantly if I talk about hospitality, because a lot of us work in the industry ourselves. So I think it's people that are automatically accepted easier into the industry within our organizations, if I can say so. But also when it comes to growing our inclusion of our broader spectrum within smaller towns and communities, there's a certain degree of social stigma that needs to be broken down. And it's not anything that's gonna happen overnight, unfortunately, but it's also a thing about, are you willing to adapt in order to ensure the continuity of your business? So adaptation and as far as inclusion is concerned is very important in that. So yeah, I hope I answered that first question.
Yes, you did. And what you bring to light for me is representation matters. So you make a very key point. As a member of the LGBTQI community, a lot of that community, to use your words, is in the hospitality industry. So representation does matter. And if we if we move broader than that LGBTQI community, then the question starts to say, what can we do about representation in the service aspect of things, in the management aspect of things that caters to that 88% that Blackie was talking about? Because, and you know, and I want to come back to you with this one, maybe on Blackie, you made this comment, you are not comfortable, you know, that people are not comfortable, the advertising maybe is not speaking to them, etc. So if representation matters, and you sit as the chair of the Tourism Business Council of SA, how can we start to shift that? How can we start to show representation so that people do start to get comfortable?
Well, for me, the starting point is, as people, we have to be patient. You must remember that you're dealing with a system here that has developed over a period of time. And part of it is starting to make people feel welcome, you know, when they get into the establishment, that they don't feel like they're intruding. And also building the culture of tourism, you know, within the families, that tourism, travel is something that we're entitled to, is something that we need to do. Because when you travel, you go out to look for something outside, and that's something that's within you. So you almost, if those of you who've watched a movie, I think it's called Into the Wild, talks about going out and looking for something that is inside you, but you go out. So there's that element of adventure. And sometimes, as I'm going to talk specifically about Black people, that tourism gives you that ability to brag, but you must have the passion for it. It's not, and you know, because the discretionary expense, you know, something that you have to plan for, but you must be open to changes. And you must be able to experiment in new things. So the culture of travel, and most of the travel decisions, you know, I know this because as a tour operator, it's made by women. Sometimes they talk to the wrong people. Women are the ones who decide where to travel, and maybe that culture has to change, and it has to change from the early ages of our kids. The kids and the women are the ones who are making decisions as to where to go and when to travel.
I tell you, that's true in my own household. I make the decisions, I do the bookings, and then I inform my husband, this is where we're going, make it work.
And he doesn't argue with you, he just pays.
Usually not. No, he trusts me. And then when we get there, it's a case of, so what are we doing next? So what are we doing now? So Karen, here's the interesting thing. If this takes patience, what I have experienced myself personally as a consumer of tourism, and I know many other Black people who will say this, probably even some from the LGBTQI industry, the differently abled. I can think of all the sort of diversity groups that were not who this industry was initially created for. You go and you make the decision, you travel, and then you meet up with that employee who actually makes you feel, without saying anything, that you don't belong. You meet up with that person who, without even saying a word different to what they've said to the next person, you just start asking yourself, oh my God, did I spend all that money and make all that planning and drive all this way just to experience this? So if inclusion matters and it takes patience, I think it takes patience on all sides. As someone who is responsible for training 12,000 employees within a hotel group, well, not directly responsible, but you know what I mean. The question I have is how do we start to breed this culture of inclusion amongst the people who we are receiving this service from, right?
Yeah, and so I want to take us back to a comment that Blackie actually made earlier on about, you know, the fact that domestic tourism was for this limited group, because then one has to remember that the employees that we have had that very limited experience as well of travel. Students coming to the school are coming to study hotel management when they've never been in a hotel. So I think that brings a completely different dynamic to customer service in this country, that the people that you're talking about that are serving you, you know, what is their experience of travel and tourism? And in fact, very often, what is the experience of good customer service? So I'm going to protect them, okay, and say, that they have had probably less opportunity than the people that are on this call, to actually experience real hospitality and tourism. And we're finding that even with the students currently at the school that we are busy mentoring because they can't come into the work environment for their work integrated learning. And they are third-year students, and some of them have never been in a hotel. Now, how can that work? I'm passionate about the people in our business because I'm involved with the people and not directly with the customers. So I really want to look at diversity and inclusion from an employee perspective more than from a customer perspective, because I'll leave that to the guys who are facing the customers. And I do think that part of the whole employee experience is to be included as part of the industry as well, and not just to come along and kind of offer their hands. We take their labor, but we might not be listening to their voices. So for me, I'm absolutely passionate about inclusion. That it's all very well to have diversity, which is a seat at the table, but this inclusion to have your voices heard. And I think we need to make sure that our employees have their voices heard, but they also have voices heard in the industry. And it's not just that they're providing a service to someone who's coming as a customer into our environment, but are we making sure that their voices are heard in our organization? And are we making sure that their voices are heard in the industry?
So there are quite a few interesting conversations coming in on the chat. But before we go to that, Refilio, I just want to ask you, so how can we make this difference? If we're saying that tourism is not only when I go to the beach with my friends, but it's when I go home, for example, how do we, I suppose that's one way of talking about domestic tourism, but it doesn't address this issue that Karen is talking about, which is I'm meant to serve hotel guests, but I've never been in a hotel. I don't know what that experience is like. Having just recently come through this yourself and now lecturing this, what are the opportunities? What can we do to practically integrate and include at the level of educating staff?
I think it's more tied to, industry collaborations. I think as we do have students that really, they come from different backgrounds, they don't have any experience in tourism. I was that student as well. So it's being very creative. It's forming, either it could be trips, it's forming maybe guest lectures coming into class. It's just trying to broaden up the tourism world in the minds of these students, and beyond it being within a textbook, actually speaking to people in the industry. I think that really sort of changes the mindsets of these students. And also when we're speaking of inclusivity, is also thinking of, okay, tourism, who is tourism for, and how do you tailor tourism or tourism experiences for a different range of people, one specific range, but what are you doing for the domestic market, the international markets, what are you doing for families? It's just trying to be very critical about it, and that's what can happen.
I like your response, and it reminds me of something someone shared with me in a different industry, by the way, the medical industry. There's a country I won't name in Africa, very, very good at the theoretical aspects. But I remember this particular doctor coming to South Africa on some kind of exchange program. She was blessed to do that. And she had never held some kind of scalpel, and she was doing this thing on accidents and emergencies. And in this country, they'd done all the beautiful theories. She had never seen a case. She had never been in the theater. And coming into Cape Town at the time, she said to me, wow, all that stuff I read, it was fantastic, but it was nothing compared to this, compared to actually being, she had the opportunity to be in Grotesque. And I think it's a bit like that. What you and Karen are saying is that students can have the best education from the best facilities, but without this collaboration from industry, it's all that book knowledge, it's not real and it's not tangible. So one of the things though that stands in the way is cost. And Blackie, you were talking about the 88%. There's a question around the 88%. In fact, there are a few questions that talk to this issue of how do you drive inclusion in a shrinking market? So how do you drive inclusion where price and affordability is purported to be a stumbling block for that 88%? How do we drive inclusion when in a post-COVID or in a COVID world, discretionary expenses are really, really super discretional and probably not available for most families with the job shrinkage that we're seeing? So it's a conundrum, Blackie, and how do we deal with that? The economics of driving inclusion in a shrinking market.
I think as an industry, we have a big role to play in exposing young people into tourism. You know, unfortunately, tourism is one of those fields where you can't just be academic about it. You need to be practical. You know, to serve someone, you have to be there and serve someone. And to understand what it means to be on the flight, you have to be on the flight. To understand the 5-star experience, you have to have the 5-star experience.
Yes.
And unfortunately, some of the things, and to Karen's point, one of the things that we do a lot of academic training, but we need exposure. And you know, when Reframing talks about the backgrounds of the students, the different backgrounds, part of it is exposure and lack of exposure. So we need to keep that balance. And what I've found, and you know, as a group, whenever we take people who are working for us, let's take people who work for us and expose them to a certain experience, by the time they come back, their perspective has changed. That's why, you know, in the industry, I'm sure Karen and probably Brenda will know that, that's why they do familiarization trips, because you need to go and touch the thing for you to experience. The price issue on travel, I mean, you know, really, like anything, you have to look for bargains. You have to look for something that is within your range. And if you look for a 5-star property, that's what you're going to get. But if you travel at the right time and do your homework, likely enough, in this day and age, there's internet. You can search, and I think you can get good bargains. But also, as I say, it's a relative term, because it's a discretionary income. It has to fit in with your budget. But go to a place where you'll feel welcome. In fact, in our group, we talk about the sense of place. When you walk into a shop or to a restaurant, you have to feel that big, that in that sense of place that you feel at home, you feel welcome. But yeah, prices are relative to the value you get. And if you do your homework, I'm sure, more special now, because international are not coming, you'll get good deals it's in domestically.
So how do you do that homework? How do you do that homework? I am part of that 88%. I really want to travel, never really done this before. For me, traveling is going home at Easter. I've never done this before. Now you're saying I must explore South Africa. Okay, maybe. Where do I start? How do I do this homework?
Well, probably Reframing will be able to answer, or Brenton will answer this, but from where I sit, like anything, you know, travel is about being curious. You've got to be curious. You've got to come out of your comfort zone. You can't go to someone who has not traveled to ask that question. You've got, you know, there has to be that element of adventure and be curious about what you're looking for. But I'm sure Reframing and Brendan will answer this question.
So Brendan, how do we start?
Well, I like what Blackie mentioned there about being curious and doing the homework ourselves. There's only so much we as an industry can do to put the specials out there as far as pricing is concerned. It cannot be spoon-fed to you without using the various search. There's a numerous amount of search engines available to find these specials out there. Online travel agents and going directly to company websites. Our own company website as a whole list of whatever specials is running on weekends, the lockdown related rates, etc. and so on. So the information is out there. Unfortunately, there's just so much we can do to expose it to you unless you actually go onto the sites and start looking into it as well. But I agree with what Blackie has said on that one, is using the services and instruments to your disposal to find out what's out there and how we can best use it for prices, because we, as talking from my organization, there are definitely rates and specials out there to accommodate various organizations and individuals who are affected within this current COVID-19 pandemic and expenses, as far as expenses go, yes.
Yeah. So, Karen, I'm going to come to you and ask you exactly the same question, and Refilio as well. And the question is, how do I start? Where do I go? There's an anonymous contribution in the Q&A, which I really love. How do we break down barriers that domestic tourists may have about certain products? Well, if you think flights are for the rich, use a bus or take a taxi. If you think hotels are for the rich and you can't get there, maybe you stay with family and friends. So that's very practical. Thank you for that, Anonymous, for those tips. So be curious, be flexible, look for non-obvious options. Karen, from you?
Yeah, and I think that's maybe something to look at and with people who are traveling. So we're chatting earlier on about that domestic tourism is if you leave your home and go and visit family. And so I think people who might be feeling that it's not the market for them, or maybe nervous and don't want to take the risk as they perceive it because they haven't done it before, and they feel they're included and they feel they have been excluded, that we need to get them to understand that visiting family is your first step in the tourism value chain. So if you've done that, well done. How did you do it? How did you get there? How did you actually decide what transport to take? Maybe you call it taxi. So what about trying something different next time? Maybe there's a train, or maybe there's a something else. And I think that if the vast majority of our people who do travel, and I mean, if you think about our population, so many people work away from home and they are traveling to get home every single chance they get. And maybe if we can sell tourism as that's your first step towards it,
Yes.
you take the risk and be curious and branch out a little bit from that. And I have a colleague who is, worked in the industry with me, and he doesn't want to fly and take an aeroplane. He's decided to drive to Durban, but he's got a little 5-year-old who's hyperactive, and he was like, oh, this is going to be a terrible journey. I'm like, stop on the way, take her to make the journey a whole experience. She's only ever flown to go and visit family in Durban. So why don't you make it an experience? And here's someone who's worked in the industry who hadn't even made that connection of being a tourist, although he's visiting family. So I think we have to sell that message to the thousands of people, even on a minimal income, who travel in this country to go and visit family, about that. I love that thing of take the risk and be curious. And maybe that's the message that we share to people, to say we are including you in this industry. You just don't realize you've actually included yourself. Okay.
Yes. Yes, that is it. It's a case of when we start to recognize, as Refilio said at the start of the conversation, that tourism starts with the home visits, whether it's Easter, whether it's, whatever holiday it is. And then you start to realize that I'm already part of the industry. So like you say, you've included yourself. I really love that. So take a risk, be bold, be curious, recognize that you're already included. So Refilio, as I come to you, just, I love this anonymous attendee. I don't know if it's the same person or different ones, but reminding us of campaigns like Shot Left. I have to say, Shot Left really has inspired me over the years to visit around this beautiful country. I remember the first time I learned about God's Window, like 10 years ago or something, must have been through Shot Left. So there is Shot Left, and there are programs like that that the SABC does to encourage us to be curious about South Africa and to love to visit. So Refilio, what else would you add to that sense of how do people know where to go in planning?
The first thing that really just came to mind for me was social media. I mean, we're all on Instagram, we're all on Facebook, and within this, we see so many posts from people in different places, and that really ignites that curiosity, and that really ignites of, okay, maybe next month, and maybe in 2 months, let's put away some money so we can go to that. So social media also is playing a very big role in just trying to create that curiosity amongst people. I mean, the way, especially right now, I think a lot of people have been visiting hiking trails and walking trails. And I feel like social media played a huge role in that, because we've all been cooped up and then all of a sudden it's posting somewhere. So that's a really great part of it.
Yeah. So what I'm picking up is that in essence, that 88%, even though not included originally in the design of what we would call formal tourism, have found a way to come into the space. have found a way to come into the space. And so the conversation now, and I'm just reading from here, is how do we make that 88% feel welcomed? So yes, we're in the space, we go home, we go on holiday, whatever, but it's one thing to go. It's another thing to feel welcomed. So Brandon, what is it that you do or we must do at an operational level, or even start thinking about in terms of now people are coming, we need to make the circle bigger, right?
Yeah. Now, through someone actually asked a question about that as well, about how even the LGBTQI community can influence domestic tourism products and change the stigma around it. And Blackie mentioned also earlier about certain things changing at home. So it's an underlying foundation that also influences long-term changes. It's not, I mean, unfortunately, not many of these things are just a button we can press and switch over into the new world, if I can say so. But if I, as a business owner, am hungry for business to come in, and knowing that I'm dependent on the domestic market, I personally would go move well in high waters to do everything possible to include any demographic or sexual orientation, whatever it is, within the product I'm providing. And I do believe also about the influences that your team members see from you as a team leader, feeding down into them. So me being inclusive of anything and anyone that enters our doors, because that business is something we need. My team sees that me as the business owner being receptive to this, being accommodating of this, and that also does influence and feed into the ripple effect about how overall domestic tourism products can be influenced. Also not only from a certain demographic group, but overall, if you look at changes in that regard. So I think for now, for short-term change, it's gonna have to be driven from the top. So top management, owners, etc., need to be driving the change they want to see in order to make it more their product more accessible to more domestic tourists. And Reframing mentioned people being cooped up for so long in their homes. And yes, at this point, it's not even it's not even a science or rocket science to decide that we want to be in the outdoors right now. Nobody wants to be in the city. So people in rural areas and little dorpies tend to benefit the most right now. So it's up to them to make the most out of the opportunity that's available to them right now.
And yet, Brandon, those little dorpies are the very places where you're likely to go and not feel welcome. And that's the reality. So a lot of our little dorpy establishments are mom and pop establishments, or a brother and a sister coming together, who maybe in their own worlds, consciously or unconsciously, when they were thinking about going into the tourism industry, were thinking about two populations, the 12% and the international. And then suddenly Brandon and co are coming, and Igbe and co are coming, and they're like, whoa,
yes,
I don't think Mara, So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the reality? How do we create a space where Mom and Pop Inc., you know, Tani and whoever, and whoever feel safe enough to open up to the 88%, and also recognize that it's not personal, it's business. And yes, this business comes with a level of service. So there's this expectation that inclusion means the industry will be open up. But the very spaces where people want to go might not be the spaces where people are being welcomed and included. It's a catch-22. What do we do? And I'm opening it up, Brandon, and then Blackie, then Refilwe, then Karen. So I will go in that order.
Well, I just want to say on that part that when for us, as from a traveler's point of view, there's a certain degree of responsible traveling that comes from both sides. As a service provider and as a traveler, we need to be respectful in both regards. So I'm not going to force my beliefs or my orientation or anything upon you as the service provider or establishment where I am provided. To make it more relevant is as a gay couple being open with my public displays of affection, whatever, in wherever this rural town I've ended up in, KZN, for example. And in the same way, I'm not expecting then me as the service provider in KZN that's now accommodating this gay couple to be giving side snares every time they come into breakfast and making me feel uncomfortable. You know, there's a social stigma that comes that needs to be respected from both sides, and I think there's common ground that can be found. And there's certain things that also needs to be a role to be played from both sides in that regard. And progress will be slow, but there is room for accommodation from both sides in that regard. Yes, and it comes to which I also say responsible traveling and being respectful from both ends.
Beautiful. I like the neutrality in what you're offering. Thank you. Blackie.
Maybe to answer that, let me just make few comments. And the first one is my personal experience. Years ago, my first experience in a restaurant. Grew up in a village, family of 8, never been in a restaurant. But on this day, my boss decided that we're traveling together, we ate in a restaurant. I've never touched a fork and knife, was used to a spoon. So now I'm confronted with a fork and knife. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know where to order to start with, even before we decide how to eat. So my normality was catching up with me that where's my spoon when I needed it? And so with those experiences, start learning, okay, this is how you hold a fork and knife, because not many of us grew up in these urban areas. So you learn from that. The second thing is that, you know, the travel is not difficult. You know, my mom is 92. The first time that she flew was when she was 89. So if an 89-year-old lady who has never traveled, has never flown, can get on the flight from East London to Joburg, we can all do it and experience it. She didn't commit suicide. She enjoyed it. She didn't feel anything. She was fine. She's never been to school, but she flew. So the point I'm making is that, you know, in South Africa, we tend to, everything is binary. It's for us, it's for them, it's them and us. We need to, psychologically, we need to get over that barrier of, no, this is not for me, this is not for us. And start, inclusivity start from within. As people who visit these mom and pops, we also have to have the responsibility, I mean, Brandon needs to alluded to that. We also have a responsibility as patrons to say, these people might not necessarily be comfortable being with us, but let's make them comfortable. That, you know, we're here to enjoy ourselves. We're not here to question your leanings, whether it's religious or otherwise. We're just here as tourists. The dollar that we're paying is the same as the guy who was here before me. Let's accept it. But to tourism people that are there, that, you know, we talk about consumer side, there's a whole lot of businesses that can be created out of these opportunities. How do we create establishments that create that comfort for everyone? How do we do that? How do we create these distribution channels that will make everyone feel welcome?
Yeah, thank you. Refilwe, and then we'll come to you, Karen, on this question.
I think it's definitely about being socially conscious. And I think with students, you really have to iterate that, you know, you're going out in the industry and you're offering a service. And how do you can offer this service? What is your personality towards them? And also thinking a bit of, you know, the age-old saying, do unto others what you want them to do unto you. You want to have an enjoyable experience. You want to feel welcome. You want to feel comfortable. So that's definitely something that you should also project as well. I mean, you're in the service industry. Tourism is about people. It's about interacting with one another. So have enthusiasm when you approach the industry. So that's definitely important. And from my side, it's always about incorporating this in the classroom and having this a place where it's respected and everyone feels comfortable and everyone can come with their own differences and still have a really engaging and a really good place to just have a really good learning experience. So yeah, from my side, that's what it is.
Karen?
Yeah, so I'm going to take us back to look at, you know, the employee side again. And, you know, Brandon spoke about leadership and that the leaders and how they're treating customers are picked up by employees. And again, I want us to really think about our employees. And as leaders, are we including them? Do they have that voice? And do they feel supported? Do they feel empowered? Yeah. So, you know, however we're treating them is also how they're going to treat the customer. And if the leader are keeping our nice face for our customers, and then we keep our side, you know, good cop, bad cop for our employees. So I think that we have to put systems in to ensure that we're inclusive with our employees. Because I think if you don't actively be inclusive, you are, even if it's accidentally, being exclusive. So I think the conscious thing we do to be inclusive, and that we really need to look at our systems and our processes within our work environment. And Blackie spoke about this them and us, and I think that you can get a leadership situation of them and us. And it, you know, when it's leaders and staff, it's got nothing to do with race and gender. It can just be a mix of all of that, but we create them and us. And we must be talking about not doing that with our guests, so we need to make sure that we're not doing that with our employees. You know, we all have different roles to play. And so I think inclusion is interesting because we can all have that experience of being excluded or included, maybe and included. So it's, you know, it's not one, we can't label it by different things. It's just got so many different facets that come in. But I really just want to challenge us as leaders of organizations or owners of organizations to say, you know, while you're looking to be inclusive of the guests that are coming, what are you doing for your employees? Are they allowed to be curious and risk takers? And do you have one big group that's called, you know, I don't know, Sokosan as the big group, or are you actually a them and us within that big group? And I think it's really important for us to look at those two things, the inclusiveness of our employees and the diversity of our employees and how we include. And then on top of that, the making sure that we don't create these structures or systems that create them and us type situations as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So Refilo, I'd like to go through another round of questioning. This time I'll start with Refilo, come back to you, Karen, Blackie, and then we'll end with Brandon. Just before I go into that question, I want to just pull in some of what we're seeing in the Q&A. So there's a question, interesting one around language. We'll touch on that. There's also the duality. So Blackie, you made the point that there should be mutuality. And someone is saying here that to your point, tourism shouldn't be difficult. It's still intimidating, but intimidating shouldn't mean difficult. There's a question around racial inclusion, or a comment around racial inclusion being both ways. So how do we, maybe it's another question we can touch on later, but I want to come to a question on curriculum first. How do we, township tourism is very exotic in our context. It's not normalized. It's still kind of really exotic. And a question that I want to discuss is, in talking about inclusion, how do we normalize township tourism so that it's not that exotic rite of passage thing that a lot of white people do when they feel that they want to discover South Africa, but rather it just becomes one, you know, one option for tourism. So I'd like to come to a question around curriculum, and then come to this question of how do we de-exoticize, if that's even a word, township tourism. So Refilo, I want to start with you. We're talking about reframing domestic tourism in the light of diversity and inclusion. Surely if we're talking about reframing domestic tourism, we should also be talking about reframing our curriculum to represent that. So how is our curriculum, to Karen's point earlier, how can we reframe, or how might we already be reframing our curriculum such that topics like this, diversity, inclusion, belonging, are taught, as well as customer service, et cetera, et cetera? What should we be doing? What are we already doing?
I think one aspect that we're already doing is the kind of learning material that is offered. More and more we're talking about case studies within our own context. We're talking about getting the research that's being done is done within South Africa, within African countries. So these are things we're incorporating. We're decolonizing our knowledge in a sense of trying to include.
I'm dying to bring in that phrase. I'm glad you did. Okay, so we are decolonizing our curriculum.
Definitely, that's what we're doing at a very, I think that's one thing that's important. I think more and more our tourism experiences, our tourism communities, and different aspects of our tourism industries are being researched, and they should continue being researched, and they should continue included within our own curriculum. So that's a way of doing it.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm very tongue-in-cheek about decolonization, but it's important because for me, it answers the question, where is your learning centered? And for me, decolonization just refers to centering the education in context. And so if our context is African, then we should center it in our own African context. So it's great to hear that that's already happening. Karen, I want to come from the corporate education side. So there's the stuff that an STH, for example, will do, but there's also continuous education that goes on in the workplace. So how are, for example, has Soho-san dealing with this continuing education around inclusion? I love what you said. You said if you're not consciously including, you're actually by default excluding. So how are you sensitizing staff to that?
Yeah, so, there's a lot of the standard stuff one would do, your customer service and explaining to people the value of a guest. Whoever that guest might be, they come with the value, and how do we ensure that our employees understand the value of every single guest that comes in, so that they don't, start putting them into different little blocks kind of thing, okay? So I think that's where it starts. But, the challenge sometimes with diversity and inclusion is that if you almost focus too much on it and you sort of overdo it, you can actually create a bigger problem. So, we get a lot of people who come, and it is quite a controversial comment, so I'm going to put it out there, but we get a lot of people who say to us, if you have disabled people in your environment, you must do sensitization to disabled people training. And what we find doing that is that what you actually do is that you identify this group as something different, and therefore they in fact start to feel more excluded than included. And so when we do diversity and inclusion training, we do it much more broader. So we don't say we're going to do sensitive to disabled people training, so that you highlight them as a group, and suddenly they in actual fact, have got a sign on their head that says, I'm disabled, treat me differently. And, we had our beloved Dr. Bill Gallagher, who was with us for years in a wheelchair. And he always used to say, I'm like you, okay? I don't want to be treated differently. I understand there have to be some physical changes that are made, but don't treat me differently. And you just get so irritated when people would ask his carer, would Bill like something to drink? And he'd be like, I'm sitting here,
Right here.
So yeah. I think that one has to be really sensitive about championing specific diversities from an organizational point of view, which can backfire in that those employees actually become, or those customers become less feeling inclusive because they're singled out. So I think that that's what the challenge is about diversity. As I say, diversity and inclusion is just so broad that it's so easy to make people an in-group or an out-group. And I think one has to be really sensitive to that. And so what we have to talk about is that every customer is valued. Every single one is valued. Every employee is valued. Okay? And how do we treat people according to that? And it's a big challenge because we all come with bias. So I arrive at work and I have a bias from my background, my culture, my gender, my language, the school I went to, whatever's going to come with the bias. And so what you're really trying to do is overcome that natural bias that people come with, okay, that we've all spoken about in the different experiences we have, and try and work with this, valuing what people bring, each individual employee, each individual guest.
Yeah. And I don't know, as I listen to you speak, I just think, Karen, it's tricky. It has to be both and, because if you take the case again of Bill Gallagher, there is a need, and maybe not even making him the example, but when differently abled people come into establishments, there's a need to recognize their needs. And at the same time, you don't want to overemphasize it such that you make them awkward. And
Yeah.
what I picked up from your example, which I think is quite pertinent, is that the overemphasizing may or may not be the issue, but what might be the issue, even more so, is speaking on behalf of.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so isn't it the thing that we all do when you talk about biases? So we think that we know how Black people should be marketed to or at. So we think on behalf of them and we create on behalf of them. We don't engage them. Same with differently able people, same with women, same with mothers with children, fathers with children. So I think it's a catch-22. And I'm coming to Blackie and Brandon to close this out, is how do we deal with this curriculum sensitivity where we do need to talk about, as we did in the early 90s, maybe even in the 80s and the early 2000s, the issues of racism in the service industry and how that needed to be specifically dealt with? Do we need to go back to that level of specificity, or are we, as Karen was saying, now talking more about broad diversity and inclusion? Because practically speaking, I think we will all be able to identify issues where we would have gone into a situation and it didn't turn out the way that we wanted. Was it because there was an inclusion issue? Was it because there was a service issue? Was it because there was a training issue? So how does the curriculum start to deal with this in a practical operations way so that we can say, no, people are being trained, people are being educated, they should know better, therefore we expect better in operations? Blackie.
I think it's just two things for me. You can either go the Asian airline route, where you create people who are like, behave like robots. You know, they'll give you service. You know, you're not going to be unhappy with the service, but you're not going to give them medals. So really, there's a service, that's what you get. We are Africans. You know, there's always that personal touch. We are warm people. You don't want to create robots. You want to make sure that people add that hospitality that is with us. But I think maybe where the disconnect is what happens in the classroom, the training, and the practical on the ground, what's happening post that. You know, we've all been into seminars. You walk out of there, you think you're going to conquer the world. You come to your boss office, your boss says, no, you're not going to do that. So, you know, so you're not going to change this company. So I think what needs to be done is that the link between what gets trained and what gets practiced, there has to be a bit of connect and understanding. Also understanding that we all have our normality. When I travel, and Karen, you probably relate to this, I come from Khayelitsha and I work at Cape Grace, which is a 5-star hotel. So I have to transition from my normality in Khayelitsha on a taxi to a 5-star experience. And you expect me to go there and poof, I can offer a 5-star service. It's difficult. Then at night I have to do it in reverse. I have to adjust. So the adjustment that I go through on a day-to-day basis is quite enormous. But I like your example about oversensitivity. Sometimes we get too oversensitive about things that don't matter because of our history. And I can tell you this free of charge that why America is in such a mess. And I lived there for 10 years, did my master's degree there. It's because of this oversensitivity on things. Yeah, we need to understand, chill, you know, all of us, whether you're a guest or you service, we're all humans. We paid for this, we want all same thing. Let's be normal. And, you know, this oversensitivity sometimes can kill our natural hospitality as humans.
Thank you for that, Blackie. So Brandon, I hope I'm not going to put you on the spot, because as you answer this question, I want to throw in a ball. I hope it's not a curved ball. And it links to what Blackie just said. So there's the adjustment to normalcy. You live in Khayelitsha, your orientation is Khayelitsha, and then you're working at the Cape Grace. There's a word for that and having to do that, and there's a phrase called code switching. So it's this needing to switch from who you are in your everyday to fit in. And there's a price to code switching, actually, because neuroscience shows us that we can't be our best work, our best selves, or do our best work when we're under stress. So when I know that I have to be like this, you know, and it's not natural to me, and I don't have the right coping mechanisms, it brings out something of stress, of resentment, whatever the negative is, it may bring it out. So here's what I'm wanting to ask you. When we think about the curriculum and the difference between my normalcy and where I need to work, code switching is a reality, without a doubt. Is the curriculum addressing this appropriately from your experience as an alumni? And if it's not, what could it be doing better or differently to prepare and help students better cope with this reality when they get into the workplace?
You're not putting me on the spot, but it's quite a deep one actually, because I come from the background before I registered with STH, where my family was not fortunate enough to have always been, or not ever have stayed in hotels before. So before I could start paying for myself, I never had that luxury and opportunity. It was always a case of staying with the relatives or backpackers type of establishments, etc. You know, camp setups in bunks and dormitories, those type of stuff. So me joining hospitality initially, my initial thing was, okay, it's now glitz and glamour and everything that comes with hotels. And my very first work integrated learning was both a shock and an eye-opener to me, because it's not glitz and glamour. It's not, you know, behind the background, there's a lot of hard physical labor that goes into it. And one of the previous webinars, I spoke about work integrated learning and giving the students more responsibility, etc. But for me personally, my personal experience, I don't think I should have, I'm glad I never walked into an environment where okay, so it's a hotel management student, let's give him reports to do, etc., etc. I walked in with my suit, looking smart in my uniform, and my very first task was to go and repack a dingy, dark storeroom at the Holiday Inn in Sandton. It was outside, it was dirty, it was the rats and everything, and that was my very first responsibility. I had to take off my jacket and I had to now go get my hands dirty. But that dirty job and doing it diligently and doing it so well made them have faith to entrust me with more from me. And that is a mentality as far as code switching. I know I'm a bit jumping now, but I think we need to also make students aware that you're not walking in there as, I am now the management student, I am here to do change, save the world. I am coming in, I'm coming to learn, number one, and getting your hands dirty is very important. The new normal that you were talking about, if my background and my previous experience with my previous employers and the current one, where I wasn't placed in housekeeping, for example, currently, general managers across the country, I have to get hands dirty, whether it's cleaning rooms, cleaning public areas, whatever. And me not having that background would have been to my detriment. Where yes. I can clean a room myself and with pride hand over the key for the guest to check in, not doubting anything I've done in there. So there's that certain element of practical background that just cannot be avoided. And the students do need to get their hands dirty. And also from that practical experience, I don't know, I think from first year, actually, I think I should have maybe spent 3 months maybe in work integrated learning, but it gives you more it opens your mind more of what the reality is of the workplace, which I think then in the long term makes the code switching slightly easier. Depending on each person's background, where they come from, it might still be difficult. For me, it wasn't difficult because I enjoy delivering a certain product at a certain standard. So yes, I come from maybe a disadvantaged background, but my standards of cleaning my house to versus keeping places clean at work does not change. The environment I live in, etc., is different, yes. But so sure, the curriculum, I can't say it should really. The foundation was laid there when I was. I don't know what's the realm. If we can give more information about what work integrated learning is now. but to give people exposure to, or students exposure to what's now expected of them within the hospitality industry. In that first year, send them in for a month or two as cheap labor, for a lack of a better term, because it's going to do them good. Let them go and pack those dingy storerooms and work in housekeeping and chop onions till your fingers bleed and whatever. Let them do all of these things because it's a necessary foundation. And from there, I think personally, from my own experience, that then lays a foundation for expected in the long term. Obviously, it's not always, as Karen mentioned, always involving your employees. Who are your employees? And how do we also make them feel included? It's important. And a leader, a good leader, you're never a perfect leader. We're all human, we all have our faults. But you always do what's necessary to include your team, make them feel included. I consider myself a democratic type of leader. I don't have the answer to anything. My team is involved in decision making, and we find a way to best meet and find outcomes, and people have different ways in which they feel motivated and excited to work within the industry. So that's also important. But lay a foundation, and as you go from your learning phase to your work integrated phase to your first role of employment, it starts gradually falling into place where you as an individual then become a leader as well. You're able to make people feel more included, both from a guest perspective and an employee perspective. When you get new trainees, how you induct them, initiate them actually into the hospitality industry.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you. What I really loved about your answer, it was comprehensive. And the two of the things I picked up from it, first is making that linking the curriculum and in the practical aspects of the curriculum for the learner between where they're coming from and where they're going is helpful. So the reality about cleaning your home to a good standard and cleaning an establishment to a good standard. The neutrality is cleaning to a good standard. So making those linkages for them helps bridge that. That's very useful. I loved that point. I also love the point that you're not coming to save and be a superhero. You're coming to learn. So you're not coming with your shiny suit to come and tell us how to do things here. Hey, when I got back that room, I liked that one. So Refilwe, I'd like to end this round with you. Brandon mentioned something very important, which I think actually opens up a door of opportunity. The point he made at the start of his contribution was when he started traveling, his inroads into travel wasn't the fancy 5 stars. It wasn't the Cape Graces of this world. It was the backpackers lodge. Right? It was the literally put your backpack on you, hiking, travel on your own, go to those kind of rudimentary places. How can you encourage your students within and without the curriculum to just be curious and courageous and engage in this kind of travel? So not all the travel is going to come from work integrated experiences, right? So how do you encourage that curiosity and that love for travel within the students, even while they're still learning?
I did this as a student in my first year, and I thought it was really great. And that's what I'm trying to do now, is that we had this assessment where we had to go to an attraction, whatever attraction, and then just go through the entire experience and then write a report around it. And for someone who had zero tourism experience, I feel like that was very much eye-opening. So that's definitely something that I've been incorporating in my own lectures, and is just go to somewhere where it's tourism related, and then within the curriculum you can tie it to a specific module outcome or a learning outcome, but also being considerate that it shouldn't be it should be something that students can actually do. You can just go to Malville, you can go to Maponeng, you can go to Soweto. It's just different, just trying to get them to embrace the tourism experiences around them that they can do without a whole lot of cost. And that's definitely something you can do just to ignite that curiosity, but also trying to get them speaking about different experiences that are there, trying to get them to link these types of experiences to what they're interested in as well. And I feel like building discussion around them is incredibly important.
I like that. And it would be so interesting to hear of their own experiences of inclusion, their own experiences of service, and to bring that back into the classroom. It would really be brilliant. Someone in the chat made the point that even when they're going home, for example, on holidays, expanding their home visits to include something of national importance or touristic importance. So you're going home anyway, as an assignment, go and see that thing and experience it as a tourist. So that would be really fantastic to hear the quality of conversation that will come from that. So there's a question in the chat around how do we grow the culture of inclusion and develop new tourism products? How I'd like you to answer this question, and I will start with Blackie, then Karen, then Brandon, then Refilwe. So Blackie, Karen, Brandon, Refilwe. And the question is around township tourism. So did you pick up, I have a bugbear with township tourism, and my bugbear is that it's kind of a rite of passage, exotic tourism. It's the thing that we do when we who are white in this country pretend that we're visiting another country, you know, and we go and then we come back. And I almost feel like it's great because it's bringing income into that country, that community anyway. Yeah, can you see even in my head, I think of it that way. But it's limiting because it's not normalized, right? And when we're talking about inclusion and we're talking about expanding tourism and tourism products, there is a way, I think, that we should be thinking about township tourism that normalizes it a bit more. And I don't know what that way is. So this is the question I'm asking you. So we know that when we want to go on that short left, when we want to go on a weekend away, we're going to go to that Dorpy town that Brandon was talking about. You know, my favorites are Paris and Pofadder personally. So we will go to those towns and then we'll come back. How do we create or reposition township tourism so that it becomes an equally viable opportunity, sustainable opportunity? And maybe even develop other similar products, as opposed to this rite of passage thing that you tick off once in your lifetime and then you've done it. And then you're waiting for the next group of international tourists. So Blackie, Karen, Brandon, and Refilwe.
Sure, that's a tough one, but I'll give it a step. I think to start with, if you look at what the World Travel and Tourism Council did when they look at they attract the domestic tourism attractions in South Africa, you'll find that number 1 is Cape Town and number 7 is Soweto. And then in between that, you have Kruger, you have Joburg, you have Robben Island. So, you know, places like Soweto are there. And I like this conversation, not only to talk about township, but only talk about rural tourism, talk about agricultural tourism, because, yes, you know, those are other experiences that we tend to forget. How do we just talk about township tourism? You must remember, tourism is sexy. You know what I mean, sexy? It gives you bragging rights that I've, yes, been to the place. Why do people go to Paris and take a picture at Ivory Tower? Because it gives them bragging rights that I've been to a place that you've never been. So make it attractive, make it something that I can go back and talk to my friends about. And you know, I get embarrassed when I talk to some of my friends still in America, when they know more about what's happening in Khayelitsha and Soweto than I do, and I live in this country. Because for them, it's that experience. They can go back and say, oh, I went to Soweto. Yes. That sense of pride is necessary even for us as South Africans to say, I'm patriotic. I've been to Soweto. I've been to these places because they give me this unique experience and this unique identity. I've been to Hector Peterson. But the thing you must remember is that people visit attractions because there's a reason for doing so. So we need to create that reason. I'm not going to just pay my money because I feel sorry for some BNB that is sitting somewhere in Pofadder. Give me a reason why I should pay that money, and I will. So yeah, I think in a nutshell, you know, make it attractive, make it sexy, make sure that I can take pictures and send to my Instagram friends that, you know, I've been to this unique place.
Yeah, I like what you say, and I can understand why Soweto is number 7. If you think about not just Hector Peterson, but Vilakazi, if you think about the wine and chocolate festival, if you think about the cycling, if you think about the abseiling, Soweto has done enough. I mean, it's you can spend a whole long weekend doing stuff and not. And even there, the cycle tours, you know, this inner city cycle tours that go through Soweto. So maybe the answer, like Blackie is saying, is other communities need to do that. Make your own as sexy as Soweto, then we will come for the cigar and wine and chocolate festival there as well. It's not as easy as that. There are issues, I know, I don't want to be too flippant. There are issues of security, of safety. There are issues of affordability, of costing and all of that. But yeah, I think we need to really interrogate and challenge these ideas of what is exotic and what is normal in our industry. Karen?
Yeah, but I think, you know, if you've got something that's wonderfully unique, and so the township travel is, you know, why not exploit it? So, you know, and I think that Soweto has done that particularly well, and the guest houses have done that well. And and I laugh at you talking about us whiteys again and did do that. So we had a group of managers that were studying through Gibbs. And we wanted them to have an opportunity to take a small business and actually do a complete business plan, strategy, everything for them. And we decided, we being me and the lecturer, that we would bus all of these people into Soweto and they would stay overnight in selected guest houses, have an experience of the guest house, but be there to work with the owner to actually write their whole strategy and everything like that. And we had this mixed group of managers there, mixed racial group, okay? And the black people hadn't ever been into Soweto and stayed in a guest house, okay? And they were really scared. And the white people were like, oh, this is fantastic, okay? And for me, it was quite an experience because I was having to talk to these people about, you're going to be safe. We've made sure that you're safe, okay? But I realized afterwards that it was something that you talk about diversity and inclusion that I hadn't even thought of, okay? So it was a group of managers and we were going to take them all, but there was hugely varied responses to the fact that
we've lost your sound for a minute there, Karen. I don't know if it's only on my side.
I'm not sure, yeah, because I'm not on mute. In any case, it was a different experience, and you talk about diversity and inclusion, and it wasn't that there was a group of white people who were nervous and whatever, a group of black people, whatever. It was just this mixed group of people who hadn't experienced it, who were nervous about it, and so it was a wonderful experience of learning to take people to that environment. So I think that if you, as a tourism venue, have got something different, exploit it, use it. And if it's township travel, go for it. Because that's what, you know, people want to experience, market it well. And I think that you've got every right then to make yourself exclusive, okay, in order to attract people to your venue, whatever it might be.
What I like from your example is that you start to talk about new tourism products as well. So the idea that this community of B&B owners, guest house owners could link with the university, that starts to talk about edu-tourism. So Blackie was saying it's not only township tourism, there's agri-tourism, there's rural tourism. So there's also edu-tourism opportunities that come out of this. And I know the business schools are always looking for experiential learning opportunities, and that opens up quite an attractive one. Thank you for that contribution, Karen. Brandon.
Okay. Both Karen and Blackie mentioned you need an attraction for wherever it is that you're going to be promoting your township tourism, and he also mentioned rural, etc. And if I think about, okay, it's not the township, but for example, I'm situated in Potchefstroom, which is predominantly a student town. And if there's not anything happening around the university, it's difficult to get people to come in now. But having gone into COVID-19 now, etc., people wanting to get out of the towns, you know, tap into the local game reserves, whatever, where you use that as an attraction point to say, okay, we 10-minute drive from X and Y game reserve, and you can then stay with us for affordable accommodation, and it's etc. So you need a main attraction. You all have mentioned Soweto. Soweto has a certain thing that attracts you to Soweto. You can spend a long weekend there, but people need a reason to be spending their money in a certain area for extended period of time. Same with how they revamped, for example, Maboneng. For a long time, people didn't feel safe staying in town and whatever. And I know people across the world who now would excited about staying at the B&Bs in Maboneng and all of those type of stuff. So there needs to be a main attraction, and I think looking at it as exotic also keeps it unique. I know it's limiting, but I think it's quite unique that it's exotic because everybody wants to tick it off their bucket list. So
Yes.
I think that element of uniqueness does count in its favor, but I also understand where you're coming from about it being a case of ticking it off my bucket list and never again. We need to have reason for people to come, and it's difficult to have a main attraction as to why you will constantly, at least once a year, twice a year, travel to my township and stay with us. And yeah, so that's my thing. What you can capitalize on as far as your main attractions is concerned, that is where you're gonna have to build your main attraction from here.
Yeah. I like what you say about the main attraction. I get the sense that the Karoo does the same thing. Like, why should anyone go to the Karoo? It's dust, you know. But there is such a charm to it now. You know, there's such a story about it, a marketing around it that makes people want to go. So yes, I hear what you say. Exoticizing something does give it some bragging rights and tourism value. Refilwe, on this finally, so how do we normalize it? How do we make it more accessible and then extend its lifespan as a tourism offer?
With me, I think just relating to my own experiences, I think it's also communicating the value that it brings. For the longest time, I didn't really want to visit Vilagasi Street because I had an idea of the experience that I would get until I was forced to do it with some relatives that were out of the country that said, we actually want to go to Vilagasi. And it was such an amazing experience personally. And I think sometimes we forget that tourism is a personal experience. And when we're dealing with aspects of cultural tourism, it can be a very transformative experience because it stays with you for the rest of your lives. So it's also something about communicating that. So now we're looking at how do we then tell this story to these people that come in, this diverse range of people that come in that really give them a very meaningful and a holistic experience and that stays with them, you know, even after they leave that particular destination. And I think with cultural tourism, it holds such potential in doing that. So it's just communicating that value that you get and remembering what the tourism experience is all about for the individual. I think.
Thank you very much for that. So I'm going to be asking for your final thoughts in a moment as we round up. Just to sort of tie together what we've spoken about in this conversation. So it is tough economic times. We are experiencing an economic shrinkage of sorts, and yet we're talking about inclusion. So one of the things we've said is that inclusion in the industry is not new. In the sense that people are not standing on the door knocking and saying, please open for me. People took the space, right? This is what your contribution, Karen. So even when you were not calling us tourists, we were tourists already. And that's the beauty about it. So we've been doing it, to say it how we say it in South Africa. So we've been doing it. The question is, how do we become more conscious about it? How do we become deliberate about it in the curriculum, in operations, in how we train staff, in how we market the opportunities? Well, some of what we've shared as the panel is there should be mutuality. So it's the idea of Blackie and Brandon's around give and take, right? Responsible tourism, responsible travel. I thought that was really beautifully put. Be curious, really be curious. Nobody is going to give you all the answers. Part of the fun in travel is planning the travel. Like Blackie said, it is discretionary spend, right? You are going to save this money, to Refilwe's point. You will save the money and then you'll travel. So be curious about what's in this country and go for it. I like the idea of courage. So it takes courage to step out of what is comfortable for you. To the point that we heard about Umam Komani, you can be 80 something and get on a flight for the first time and have a sense of adventure about it. Don't kind of be full of what will not work, etc. And the invitation, I guess, is in our thinking as leaders, as managers, as employees, as lecturers, as operators, is be non-binary. So there's this idea that in our history, or our history compels us to sort of binary tense positions. But let's move away from that. Let's be non-binary in our positions, because this thing is leader-led, and leader is not only the person at the top, it's the person facing the guest, right? That is representing at the moment. I loved your contribution, Karen, about a systemic approach, because issues of inclusion are systemic issues. And when we talk about transforming an industry, it's a systemic conversation. It hits curriculum, it hits consciousness. It's the idea that everyone has to be valued. We all come with our bias, so nobody's excluded from this. And so we all have this responsibility to manage this transitioning of normalcy. There are opportunities to the curriculum to design code switching in a way that is more resilient or creates resiliency for the young people then. Okay, I take back what I said about not liking exoticism with township tourism. It has its place. So main attraction, unique attraction, if you have it, why not? Flaunt it, use it. So this has been a really interesting conversation. As we are coming to the end, I really want to appreciate each of you and ask for final thoughts. So I started with Refilwe when we opened the conversation. I'm going to start with you, Brandon, this time. Then I will go to Blackie, I will go to Karen, and then I will end with Refilwe. And it really is this simple. We're talking about reframing domestic tourism to foster diversity and inclusion. Final thoughts on the theme, Brandon.
Final thoughts, I've got 3 points here. Number one being price structure. So service providers, establishments, relooking their structures with people that is currently financially constrained, currently within financial constraints. That's number one. Social acceptance and open-mindedness. So going back to the responsible tourism, being socially accepting from both ends in order to open up that inclusion market for everyone to travel freely and willingly. And then the willingness for people or customers, guests, etc., to explore. Use the internet. We've got mobile devices. Explore. Find what's out there. There's a lot of information out there. You mentioned short left earlier. Going to respective websites for different hotel groups. It's there. Start exploring and finding what we can use to your advantage.
Yes, I would add to that, plan early. So my experience with travel is the earlier you plan, the better the bargains. Thank you for that, Brandon. Blackie, from you.
Thank you for facilitating this, and to my fellow panelists, Refue, Brandon and Karen, and to the participant. I think my last thought is very simple, is that when you talk about issues of inclusion, sometimes you get trapped in the past. My kids who are now old, they'll tell you that I always tell them that there's nothing you can do about your ancestors. But there's a lot that you can do about your descendants. So be that change. Courage is contagious. Be the courageous one. Be the one who go out on a limb and risk being ridiculed. But go out and be brave. Because as I say, there's nothing you can do about the past. There's nothing you can do about your ancestors. But you can do a lot to change the future. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate in this.
Thank you, Blackie, for your contributions. Karen.
Yeah, so now we go back to the employees, because that's where my passion lies. And I think that, diverse teams can benefit from having a group identity. That's what we need to create. We need to get people to be on the same page and put aside their differences and really work together and feel that they absolutely belong, and so that they can identify as a group. So for me, while we're looking at all these diverse employees guests that are coming in, it's really about making sure that the people that we work with have a strong identity as well, and that we can work together. It's amazing to see that, and we have such wonderful opportunities in this country to be able to experience a diverse, amazing diverse country, which offers us so much as tourists. But that offers us so much as individuals who live in this country as well. And we have such a diverse amount of people that we can work with, and that we need to embrace the diversity that we have. And so we can get group identities, because we'll find them, you know, if they're there. We don't have to always look for our differences. Let's look for the things that bring us together. And I think that makes us wonderful and powerful as South Africans to be able to do that.
Yes, it's both and, isn't it? It really is.
It
There's
is, yeah, and there's and there's a wonderful model that I'm going to type into the box for everybody called the SCARF model, and that you can look up, that really looks at how can we create people to feel that they can work together and not feel threatened by each other. Our guests shouldn't feel threatened by us. We as people working together shouldn't feel threatened. How do we value each other and really work together and accept diversity and make it inclusive and not make diversity exclusive?
Thank you, Karen.
Box,
yes. Yeah. I like that. So that's David Rock's SCARF model. If you type it in there, we'll get it into the Q&A. Thank you. Reframing.
Okay. I also just want to start off by saying how much I enjoyed this conversation. I think they're actually very important. And it's such an eye-opener because, you know, issues of diversity and inclusivity are important because the way you embrace it within the classroom influences and shapes the individual going out in the industry. So it's very important. And I feel like there's still a lot more to be done. And especially in this changing tourism environment, I think maybe cooperating with industry more so students can be well aware of the changes going on as they happen. I feel like that really would be more impactful. And understanding that it's also a learning process. We're still learning a lot regarding these things, and I've learned a lot within this session. So it's, you know, we're learning as we go. There's that element there.
I'd like to thank you all. Let's just see what's going on. Great conversation. The personal experiences added a lot of relatable information. Thank you for this. So thank you, panelists. I just want to share with you some of what I'm seeing in here. Great points. Yes, it starts with self. Not everything is binary. Really liking the responsible tourism, Brandon. Campaigns. I think we've covered most of it. There's just a conversation, Blackie, around, do you think business is doing enough to promote the domestic tourism over and above what SAT DMOs are doing? So we've got 1 or 2 minutes. Maybe we can take that question, and I'll see what other question we can take in the time that we have. Oh, something about trains. How do we get trains being put? But I think we have Rovos Rail already. And the anonymous mentions that, but how do we get this mode of tourism to be inclusive? Because it reaches areas normally forgotten by other means of transportation. So yeah, that's a tongue twister for me. So maybe those two, Blackie, are there other ways we can be promoting domestic tourism? So from a marketing perspective, maybe 1 or 2 final thoughts on that, as that was specifically asked to you.
I think they are. You know, the provincial tourism, the cities, the municipalities, you know, they need to participate in this. You know, I always give a tale of 2 cities, Parys and Mthatha. Mthatha, we have Mandela, probably one of the areas that should be so attractive because of Mandela legacy. We have Mandela Museum. In Paris, we don't have much, but they keep on promoting themselves. So it's all about positionings. I think that the cities have to go out or the areas have to go out and market themselves, and people will come. And but go back to that value proposition. Why should I visit your place? And that's because it's my last money, I've saved it. Give me a compelling reason why I should visit. And it's not only SA Tourism's function to do that.
Yeah, especially in this economic climate. And as I said, Paris and Puff Adder, I'm a fan of those. They are beautiful at marketing themselves. Panel, I would like to thank you so much. God bless you all. Refilue, Karen, Blackie, Brandon, thank you for being a fantastic set of people to have this conversation with. Thank you very much. Very insightful. That's from the Q&A. Thank you so much for this conversation. This is my 2nd webinar and they have been inspiring. What a wonderful discussion. Thanks for the inspiration to explore my own country and province. And I think we will leave it at that. Enough said. Thank you all. And thank you all for joining and listening. Thank you for the rich engagement in the Q&A. You've made this a brilliant webinar. We appreciate you. And we want to just say thank you to the School of Tourism and Hospitality within the University of Johannesburg for hosting us. Thank you. God bless you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so
Bye.
much. Thanks.
Bye-bye.